Thank you so much for joining us. Today, our presenter will be Debbie Nicole. Debbie is our workshop chairperson and the leader of this online virtual learning experience. She's also a board member and has been a master gardener since the class of 2017. So hopefully you're ready to learn all about cucumbers, and Debbie, take it away.
Hi, everybody. I am joining you today from beautiful Quebec, Canada. So hopefully everything will run correctly here from so far away. I am going to talk to you today about growing cucumbers in your home garden. Little quick history of cucumbers, in case you want to know, how did cucumbers get to the United States? They actually originated in India more than 3,000 years ago. From there, they spread to China, Italy, Greece, and North Africa. Around 1800 or so, the Romans took cucumbers with them to France when they colonized up there. And from there, they ended up going to England in around 1300. And eventually, when the colonists came over, they made it to the colonies, the American colonies around 1550, the mid 1500s. They were actually first grown in Massachusetts and Virginia. So a little bit of background and cucumber trivia for you. Okay, if you guys were here last week when we talked about squash, cucumbers, squash, melons, and gourds are all in the cucurbit family. As a result, you will probably notice if you were here last week, they have a lot of the same pest problems, a lot of the same disease problems. So they are together in the same family with those squash we talked about last week. And also, as you can see from the definition of cucumber, they are considered technically a fruit. So they are a fruit that is cultivated to be used as a vegetable, just like tomatoes and peppers and squash also. Okay, talking about varieties. There are nearly 100 different kinds of cucumbers out there. So we're not going to go through all 100 of them. I am going to be sending you some resources that have a lot of information about all the different varieties unique to what you want to grow in your garden, depending on your conditions and how much space you have. So right now, I'm just going to tell you that basically there are two different categories of cucumbers. There are slicing cucumbers and there are pickling cucumbers. Now, slicing cucumbers tend to grow a little bit bigger, usually harvested between 6 and 10 inches, but they can grow, some of these can grow really big. You probably don't want to let them get too big because, there's really no reason for that. They're eaten immature, and you don't want to leave them on the vine too long till they get too big. So slicing cucumbers tend to have a little bit more of a bitter taste. They also have a thicker skin. They're not great for pickling because of that thick skin, but they can be pickled if you pick them when they're really small. They're just not the best pickles. For making pickles, you want to use pickling cucumbers. And pickling cucumbers tend to be short and blocky. They have a thinner skin. They ripen really fast, so you have to keep an eye on them when they're growing. And they're great for making pickles. You can make pickles, but if you prefer, like my husband wants me to grow these kind of cucumbers, but he likes to eat them fresh. So they can easily be eaten fresh, just like slicing cucumbers. In the graphic here that you see, the picture on the top is a slicing cucumber, the American slicing cucumber. The one just below that is actually an English or European cucumber, which is a seedless, also known as burpless cucumber type. And we'll talk a little bit more about how that comes about, that a cucumber can be seedless. The next one that you see is a pickling cucumber. As you can see, they are much shorter, but can be just as fat in diameter as the slicing cucumbers. And just below that is actually a Persian cucumber, which is another specialty type of cucumber that is also seedless and burpless. And then on the very bottom of this picture, you see a lemon cucumber. Lemon cucumbers are called lemon cucumbers not because of the way they taste, but because of the way they look. They have the appearance of a lemon, and they tend to have a lot of seeds. Okay, we have had so much interest in growing in containers. So I thought I would give you a little bit of extra information about the kind of cucumbers that you might want to grow in containers at your home. Here's a little bit of a short list. Anything that is advertised as being a dwarf plant, a bush plant, a compact plant, or sometimes advertised as just a variety made for containers. It would be a good choice to grow in a container. These are smaller plants, so you don't have to worry about them taking up as much space. The picture on the left that you see here is a cucumber that's being grown in a pot. You can grow cucumbers in pots that are at least 14 inches. I wouldn't try to grow anything smaller because of the root system of the cucumbers. A couple things you can do if you grow a cucumber in a pot. The vines will expand and fall over the sides of the pot. So to give those space, you can actually take this pot and set it on another pot that's turned upside down. This way the vines can spread and hang down. In this particular picture, another option is to use a regular tomato cage. And this is like a way of trellising the cucumber in the pot. So that'll give it a lot of support to keep the fruits up. You don't want the fruits to be touching the ground. So if you're going to use a container, you can just use your standard, regular old commercial potting soil. Works just fine for growing cucumbers in containers. If you are going to grow them in a container, do make sure that you have good drainage. If you have a pot like this, you probably need to make sure it has at least 4 drainage holes in the bottom to allow sufficient amount of water to drain out. Okay, let's talk about seeds and plants. Mostly, and I always do this, most of the time cucumbers are direct seeded in the garden. You can start them ahead of time. If you do, be very careful not to let the plants get too large. If they get more than, say, a first true pair of leaves, they don't always transplant very well. And if you're going to start them ahead of time, you can do it. You could start them indoors now if you wanted, give them a couple of weeks. Even towards the end of the month, it's not going to be too late to plant cucumbers. They like it hot. So the warmer, the better. If you start them in like a peat pot or one of those little peat plugs so that you don't have to disturb the roots when you're transplanting them. If you put them in a pot and you have to dig them out, they have a hard time surviving. The seed packets that you get, the one I have, the picture here is actually the seeds that I'm growing this year. I prefer to grow heirloom or organic type things in my garden. But if you're concerned about pests and diseases, there are many, many hybrids out there that are bred to be disease resistant or even pest resistant. So if you're looking through your seed catalogs or reading your seed packets and you're concerned about diseases, make sure that you find something that's labeled disease resistant or disease tolerant to have cucumbers that will resist those types of diseases. Okay, let's talk about your soil requirements. Hopefully you were able to get a soil test. It's a good idea to get a soil test for your vegetable garden soil and make sure that you know what is already in your soil. The pH, ideal pH can be anywhere between 5.8 and 7. They're very tolerant of a little bit higher pH. Their absolutely perfect pH would be around 6 to 6.5, like most vegetables enjoy that pH level. The problem with fertilizers is they don't need a lot of nitrogen. Maybe at the very beginning where they're just starting to grow and put out leaves, you can put something with nitrogen on them. I usually use something along the lines of a fish emulsion type thing to give them a little boost. But after they start blooming and putting out flowers and fruit, you want to keep the nitrogen as low as you can. Otherwise, you end up with problems of too much growth, too much leafy green part. And if the nitrogen is too high, your flowers will actually fall off, and your fruit, your little baby fruits can fall right off the vines. And that's something that can happen if you have too much nitrogen. Cucumbers do need phosphorus and potassium. A lot of the soil in Delaware is already pretty high in phosphorus. I know mine is. So I don't need to add a phosphorus supplement. That's why it's a good reason to get a soil test. You don't want to add more phosphorus if you already have a lot of phosphorus in your soil. If you do need phosphorus, a good choice of a fertilizer is bone meal, adds phosphorus without adding a lot of nitrogen. Potassium is also very important for the health of the plants. If you need potassium, and my soil test showed that I was low in potassium, you can apply a high potassium fertilizer, such as sulfate of potash is a good choice for organic gardens. I know in the soil test, they actually, if you had your soil test and your potassium was low, they might recommend muriate of potash, but muriate of potash is actually not approved for organic gardens. So if you're going organic like I am, of course, it's all totally your choice whether you're organic or not. I would recommend using something like sulfate of potash, or even the product that I'm using this year is called green sand. It's only potassium, only provides potassium because I don't need phosphorus in my soil. So make sure you get those soil test results and use that to base your choice of fertilizers for your garden. Okay, preparing your soil. Cucumbers have a unique root system. They can have a deep tap root that, if they're not in a container, if they're in the soil, that can go down as much as 3 or 4 feet deep into your soil. But other than that, the rest of the roots that go horizontally are shallow, within the top 8 to 10 inches of the soil, and they will grow outwards away from your plant, sometimes as much as 2 to 7 feet, depending on the variety of cucumber and how much space they are allowed to grow in. So you want to make sure that when you're preparing your soil, you incorporate a lot of organic matter. They like compost, they like any kind of organic material, rich, loamy soil. And make sure you incorporate that into the top 7 or 8 inches at least of soil to get them off to a good start. You can plant cucumbers in rows or hills. If you're planting them in hills, you can create those little hills before you start, usually about 4 to 6 inches high. And the advantage of this is it gives it a little bit more exposure to warm air. So they like it warm. In order to germinate, they need to be warm. So this will give them a little extra warmth if you put them in a hill. So I'm actually doing mine in hills for the first time this year. I haven't done that before. Okay, water and light. Cucumbers have the highest water content of any vegetable. They're actually about 95% water. So in order to keep them from drying out, they need a lot of water, more than your average vegetable. The best way to give them consistent watering, consistency is very important. Consistent, regular water is to put them on a drip system with a timer, which is what I have done. I have a drip hose set up, a little timer that I got at the big box store that is activated by light. So I don't have to do anything. As soon as the sun comes up in the morning, it starts giving them a little bit of water. So that's what I'm using. They need about 1 to 2 inches of water per week. I know it's hard to determine that exact amount. You don't really have to. Just think about them needing twice as much water as most of the plants that you have in your garden. As far as sunlight goes, they like a lot of sun, probably as much as you can give them. but they really have to have 6 to 8 hours of sun per day. 8 is much better than 6. They will tolerate a little bit of shade, but they are happiest and grow best when they can get 8 hours of direct sunlight every day. Okay, when do you plant your cucumbers? The soil temperature, you can check that with a soil thermometer. I know we've talked about this in some of our other workshops. You can take the temperature of the soil. If it's below 60 degrees, it is not warm enough for cucumbers to germinate. So that's an absolute minimum temperature to plant your seeds. Other than that, they can tolerate any warm soil up to 95 degrees. You don't want to plant them any sooner than 2 weeks after the last frost, which is we're probably about there now. You probably want to check your soil temperature first and make sure it's at least 60 degrees. You can plant them, as I said before, in hills. If you're planting them in hills, put about 3 seeds. You can go up to 5 in a hill if you want to thin them later. 3 seeds per hill. Make your hills about 36 inches or, a yard apart. Or if you're planting in rows, put individual plants about 12 to 18 inches apart. The same goes for the seedlings. If you're transplanting the seedlings into rows in your garden, plant them about 12 to 18 inches apart, or you can plant a seed. Your seeds 12 to 18 inches apart. And all cucumber seeds need to be planted about from a ½ inch to an inch deep. Okay, a little bit about companion plants. If you're going to choose one companion plant for your cucumbers, radishes should be your best choice. You can plant radishes right in the hills, right with the cucumbers, a couple of seeds, let them grow, don't pull them out, let them flower and go to seed. The radishes, the smell of the radishes somehow is a repellent for cucumber beetles. We're going to talk about cucumber beetles in a minute, but they are very, very bad for your crops. So the radishes will help with that if you would like to have a little bit of a natural way to take care of that. Some other options that are good companions: beets, carrots, onions, all grow well with cucumbers. Another thing you could think about planting in there, if you want to go old school for your trellis and your support for your cucumbers, you can plant corn or marigolds close by. Sunflowers close by. Corn and sunflowers will grow tall, and you can actually train your cucumber vines to climb up those plants. In addition, sunflowers are excellent for attracting beneficial insects to your garden. So there's another advantage. Nasturtiums and marigolds across the board are great for repelling those bad bugs. Nasturtiums I use all the time. They help repel the squash bug, which is the main insect that I've had problems with on my cucurbits in my garden. Marigolds are great for everything. They do well with repelling insects of all types in your garden. If you choose to plant herbs near your cucumbers, oregano and dill are good options. Be careful with oregano because it is a perennial. So if you plant, wherever you plant oregano, unless you're planning on digging it up and destroying it, it'll come back every year. Dill is also a great choice, and it will attract those beneficial insects to your garden also, which is always a good thing. Okay, this is what I found actually the most interesting about this whole deal with cucumbers. All cucurbits are what we call monoecious plants, meaning that they have flowers that are both male. As you can see on the left picture here, this is a picture of a male cucumber flower. As you can see, the stem just looks like a narrow little stem. So that's how you can tell if it's a male cucumber flower. And the one on the right with the bee on it is actually the female cucumber flower. And if you look closely at your cucumbers, you will be able to identify the female blossoms because it looks like they have a little baby cucumber right behind the flowering part. So these are monoecious plants. They have about ideally you want to find them with about half and half male and female flowers. Now the male flowers will be the first ones that appear on your plant. So if you go out there and you see you have a lot of male flowers, and you probably heard this last week about the squash because it's the same deal. If you have a lot of male flowers, don't panic. They come out first, and the reason for that is they are there and ready and waiting to provide pollen to the female flowers when they appear. The other types of the old-fashioned cucumbers were always monoecious. So that was your old wild cucumbers also. But since then, in modern times, they have come up with these hybrids. And one of them is a genoecious cucumber. And this is a cucumber that is bred to have all female flowers, all female flowers. So the advantage of this is, of course, you get more cucumbers from the flowers. They do need to be pollinated. So if you buy a seed packet that's advertised as being genoecious, they will actually throw in a small percentage, 10 to 15% of the seed will be monoecious, so that you will get some male flowers in order to pollinate those flowers. The disadvantage for me of going with the genoecious is that those blossoms come out all at once. So what will end up happening is you'll get a whole bunch of cucumbers all at once, which is great if you're, have a farm stand or a CSA and you want to sell them and you get all these cucumbers and you can go sell them fresh. If you're just using them for your own consumption, I wouldn't do it, because I would get a whole bunch of cucumbers and I wouldn't be able to eat them all. You can't freeze them unless you're going to make pickles out of them. You have too many cucumbers at once. So that's the disadvantage. The third type of cucumber is called parthenocarpic. These are another hybrid that has been bred to not require pollination at all. And these cucumbers are the ones that are seedless and or burpless, the same thing. And they are bred to be seedless. The thing that you have to watch out for with these is if you're growing some parthenocarpic cucumbers, but you're also growing some monoecious cucumbers nearby, they can become pollinated. And what happens is you will discover that your seedless cucumbers all of a sudden will have some seeds in them if they cross-pollinated, because cucumbers will cross-pollinate with each other. Different types of cucumbers will cross-pollinate. You might have heard that cucumbers will cross-pollinate with melons and give them a bitter flavor, and that is just kind of a old wives' tale or a myth. That doesn't happen. They do not cross-pollinate with melons at all. Okay, let's talk about maintenance and fertilization. We talked a little bit about nitrogen before. Like I said, when your cucumbers are young, you can give them some nitrogen when they're smaller. I would avoid nitrogen once they start blooming and putting out fruit, because you'll end up getting too much greenery and not enough fruit. And that's true for anything that produces that's a fruiting vegetable. So you want to avoid a lot of nitrogen once they start fruiting. As far as cultivation goes, as we said before, the cucumbers have a lot of shallow horizontal roots. So when you're out there pulling weeds around your cucumbers, you want to hand pull those weeds very carefully in order to not disturb the cucumber's roots. So that's very important. Mulching, let's talk about a couple of different types of mulching. One use of mulch, you can use a straw type mulch if you have cucumbers that are close to the ground or lying on the ground. It's not really good for them to be in contact with the soil for quite a few reasons, which we'll get into when we talk about diseases. But if you put a little straw under them, that'll help keep them off the ground if that's happening to you. The other thing you can do is if you need to warm up your soil or you want to keep the soil warmer for production, you can use like a black plastic mulch to warm up the soil. It's a great thing to do early in the season to give them a little bit of a boost with warmth and a head start. Another thing that we recommend is if you're growing your vining type cucumbers, it's not necessary for your bush varieties or your compact plants. But if you're growing vining cucumbers, those vines can be as much as 6 to 8 feet long. The best and the healthiest way to grow them is to use a trellis as shown. And since the vines are 6 to 8 feet long, you can use a trellis that's 6 to 8 feet tall if possible. Just make sure that you don't put the trellis in a location where you're going to be shading other parts of your garden that need sun. The advantages to trellising, for one, space. Your vines will take up a lot less space when they're growing vertically. For two, it's easier to water. You can just water directly at the stem and not worry about getting the leaves and the fruits wet, which is a bad thing for funguses. As we know in Delaware, later in the summer, those fungus things start coming. If you keep your cucumbers on a trellis, not only will you keep them drier, that you'll get more of an airflow through those vines to prevent those funguses. Another advantage is they're easier to harvest because you can look through them and see them up at more eye level, easier to see. They also hang, they don't touch the soil, so you won't get those white spots. The cucumbers will get white spots if they're laying on a surface where they're laying. So if you want even, green, straight, well-developed fruits, trellising is recommended. All right, let's talk pests. The number one worst thing that can get into your cucumber plants is the cucumber beetles. And I know we talked about these a little bit because they will attack all your cucurbits. So Linda talked about these a little bit when she was telling you about squash. They will attack your squash also. These little guys are about a 1/4 inch long. They are black and yellow, or sometimes a yellowish green color. And cucumber beetles come in both a spotted and a striped variety, as you can see in the picture here. Now, what these adult cucumber beetles will eat is they will eat the foliage, they will eat your flowers, they will nibble on the fruit. They can damage melons by scarring the rind of the melon with nibbling on them. And then they also have their larvae, which will eat the stems and the roots of the plants. And these guys can fly, so they will flit around from one plant to the other. But the absolute worst thing you have to worry about, much worse than any damage they can do by chewing on your plants, is that they spread a disease, a very bad disease called bacterial wilt. So I am going to, before I talk about the other pests, I'm going to talk about this disease. So bacterial wilt is spread by the cucumber beetle. And how this happens is a cucumber beetle actually stores this bacteria. Not every cucumber beetle, but a lot of them will store this bacteria in their guts. Over the winter, they have rested, they've overwintered in a weedy area of your yard. And as soon as those seedlings emerge, those guys are ready and they come out and they start attacking your seedlings. The best way to protect your seedlings is to use like a row cover to keep the bugs off of there. The only thing you can do about bacterial wilt is prevent those cucumber beetles from getting on your plants. Of course, once your plants start blooming, you can't keep the row cover on there because you need them to be pollinated. So what you're going to have to do is go in there, get those. If you have a small garden, keep an eye out, scout for these bugs, and hand pick them off. Now you can use pyrethrin type insecticides. The problem with those is you have to remember that they will also kill the bees. So if you kill your cucumber beetles, you'll also kill the bees, then your flowers might not get pollinated. So that's another big problem. So how this happens is the cucumber beetle has this virus in their gut. They go and they bite your plant, they nibble on your plant, and the bacteria comes from their mouth and gets into the vascular system of the plant, and it spreads like wildfire. Suddenly you'll go out there and look, and your plants will look like this, and there's nothing you can do about it except pull those plants out and get rid of them. So the key here is prevention of this disease. It's very devastating disease. Okay, now I'm going to jump back to the pests, because this is another pest that can spread some disease. Aphids, you guys are probably familiar with these little tiny things. Generally, they will get in your garden and they will get on stems and start taking their sucking mouth parts and puncturing those and sucking the juice out of your plants. I haven't found them to do a lot of damage to the plants by doing this. They're pretty easy to get rid of. They come off really easy. You can shake the plant, knock them off. You can take your hose with a gentle spray and spray them right off, and they may find their way back. The other good thing you can do if you have aphids is attract lady beetles to your garden. Plant some flowers, anything for pollen. Lady beetles like to visit all of those plants. If you can attract the ladybugs, lady beetles, they will have a feast on your aphids. They can eat them so fast, and so many of them. But what these aphids do is they spread a Mosaic virus disease. They can spread this to your plants, and this is what the Mosaic virus looks like. So the Mosaic virus, the aphids actually, they spread it by biting a plant that has the virus, and then they bite another plant. The virus doesn't stay in the aphid very long. Something you can try is plant a trap crop, something that the aphids really like, so that if they're visiting your neighbor's garden and your neighbor has a Mosaic virus and they've bitten those, before they come to your plant, your cucumbers, they can munch on something like wheat, and that actually cleans them. It cleans out the virus from their system. So you can plant a trap crop. It's one thing you can do. The symptoms, as you can see in the picture, it's called a Mosaic virus because you get this mottling color, this dark and light green spotted thing. It can happen to starts on the smallest leaves, it spreads to larger leaves, and then eventually your fruit will also become kind of mottled and even lumpy with this disease. You get stunted plants, you get funny looking flowers, they will look green instead of yellow, and your fruits will be small, deformed, and have a mosaic pattern. So the way you prevent this one also, there's no cure. Once they get it, they're done, but you can prevent it by trying to keep the aphids under control. Okay, this is my arch enemy. Other than Japanese beetles, squash bugs I actually stopped growing any cucurbits for a couple of years because I had such a problem with squash bugs. They will overwinter in your soil. So if you have a problem with them, a good idea is to make sure you practice the good cultural practices like crop rotation, so that you don't plant cucumbers in the same area where those squash bugs can come out in the spring and find them. Squash bugs will attack all cucurbits. I've had them. I tried to go honeydew melons one year and they got them and they were gone. They eat my zucchini. So like I said, I had to take a break from planting any of those in that family for a year or two, just so that I could get rid of them. They will get on the stems, they will suck all the juices right out of the plant, and it will die very quickly. You come out one day and pick a zucchini, and then the next day you say, oh, I'll pick that zucchini tomorrow, and it's gone, and the plant is dead. The best way I have found to manage these is to look for the eggs. So I usually go out into my garden every morning and I scout, I go around and I turn over the leaves and I look for these little patches of eggs like you see here. If you can get those, scrape them off or remove them somehow before they hatch, that's the best way to control these squash bugs. Like I said, I'm an organic gardener. I have tried neem oil and insecticidal soap, and these guys are pretty resistant to some of those things. So like I said, the best way I found is to get the eggs, find the eggs and get rid of them. And of course, hand pick or squish any of these bugs that I find. Another problem pest that attacks cucumber plants are pickle worms. So as you see in the picture here on the bottom right, this is the pickle worm moth. The pickle worm moths need to overwinter in a warm area. Usually they're down in Florida, but they will migrate north and lay their eggs around your cucumber plants. And then these little pickle worms will come out. You know you have a problem if you see these little perfectly round holes in the vines or the fruit of your plants. What they like to do is they like to eat the buds and the small fruits off of your plant. So if you have no buds, no flowers, then you have no fruit. So it's a pretty good idea to try to control these guys. The best way to do it is to use a row cover early in the season before your flowers bloom and keep these moths from laying their eggs nearby. Another disease common in Delaware, any of these fungal diseases. So downy mildew, powdery mildew, sclerotinia is pictured on that really yucky looking cucumber there in the middle of your slide. This is also known as white mold. All of these fungal type diseases are really hard to battle in Delaware, where you end up with high humidity in the late summer. That's when you'll often see these diseases appear. And the picture on the right is some downy mildew. You can see it growing on the leaves. You want to prevent these funguses by keeping your foliage as dry as you can and keeping your fruits off of the soil. Trellising is a good way to manage this, like we said earlier, because it'll keep your fruits high and dry and airflow, and you'll have less chance of developing any of these fungal diseases. Another thing, and this has happened to me, and I kept saying, why are my cucumbers coming out so funny looking and crooked and curled? So the most common reason that this can happen is poor pollination of your plants. In this picture, as you can see, the end close to the stem looks fine, but the blossom end is shrunken and curled up. So what'll happen is when the bees will come to pollinate, and you need bees because the pollen in cucumbers is kind of sticky, so it's not spread much by wind like some of the other types of vegetables. So it really needs bees or other insects to get this pollination done. And what will happen is if something gets partially pollinated, so enough of the male pollen doesn't get into the female cucumber and it doesn't advance, you end up with an incomplete pollination. So it turns out that the end closest to the stem there, it was pollinated fine. The seeds in that area were fine, but the ones at the blossom end did not get completely pollinated. So what can you do about this? If you're having a problem with pollination, you can try hand pollinating. And I believe we talked about this with squash too, the same situation. You can take actually a little tiny paintbrush or even a cotton swab and pretend like you're a bee. Get into the male flowers, spread it around, get some pollen on your paintbrush or your Q-tip, and go to the female flower and spread it around in there and keep repeating and going back and forth between them. And that's sometimes what you have to do if you just don't get enough bees visiting. The problem with not having enough bees, of course, is all these insecticides that people, maybe your neighbors are spraying all over their gardens, are killing all the bees, and the bees don't make it to your cucumbers. So that's a problem with pollination. Another cause of this can be irregular watering. So your cucumbers get stressed. There's a drought stress, they haven't gotten enough water, can also cause this. So make sure that you are giving your cucumbers a lot of consistent, regular watering. Excessive heat, really, really, really hot days can kill pollen. So even if the bee visits your flower and spreads that pollen around, some of that pollen might be dead already. So even though it's doing its job and spreading the pollen, your cucumber will be incompletely fertilized and you will get these misshapen cucumbers. Another cause, low fertility, not getting enough of those nutrients, the phosphorus and the potassium that it needs. So again, look at your soil test. If you need phosphorus, if you need potassium, make sure that you apply those fertilizers. But excessive nitrogen, too much nitrogen fertilizer will also cause the same problem. That's something that can happen. It can make your blossoms drop off. It can make your fruit fall off the vine, and it can also cause your fruit to be deformed like this. Okay, let's talk about picking your cucumbers. Your cucumbers, most seed packets for cucumbers will say that they're ready to harvest around 55 to 65 days. This usually puts us around June to October for harvesting cucumbers. The thing you want to do is you make sure that they ripen very, very quickly. So you're going to have to go out to your garden every other day, every 2 to 3 days at most, and harvest any cucumbers that are mature enough to be picked. The slicing cucumbers can be picked at 6 inches up to maybe, depending on the variety. I mean, there's some weird varieties that come from Asia that can grow like 3 feet long. I don't know what you would do with a 3-foot long cucumber, but in general, the slicing cucumbers, you don't want to let them get more than 10 or 12 inches long. So if they're getting that big, they're ready to be picked. The pickling cucumbers can be picked as small as 2 inches. So from 2 to 6 inches, you want to start harvesting those. What you do not want to do is let them turn orange or yellow. This means that they are overripe. They will be bitter tasting. The seeds will be hard, and they're no good. I mean, I throw them out if they get like this. And it's easy to miss a cucumber, especially if you don't have them trellised and they're covered up in all the vines and leaves, and you think you're harvesting them all, and you go out there one day and turn over a leaf and there's a yellow cucumber. You need to get rid of it. You need to keep these, pick the cucumbers regularly. Picking them regularly is going to cause it to bloom more and produce more cucumbers. So you need to make sure that you pick those cucumbers often. When you are harvesting them, take something and cut them off the vine. You don't want to tear them. You can damage your plant and also open up a space that diseases can get in. So make sure you just carefully cut them about the stem, about 1 inch away from the cucumber. As far as storage goes, like I said, they're mostly water. They need to be stored in high humidity. So I have a refrigerator that has one of those little crisper drawers that I can adjust the humidity. So I turn it all the way up. 95% humidity is fine. This keeps them from losing that moisture. Refrigerator, it's recommended that they be stored around 50 to 55 degrees. The FDA says refrigerators should be no temperature higher than 40. So you got to do what you got to do, but you don't want to let them get too cold, or especially you don't want to let them freeze. They don't freeze well at all. So you can store them in the refrigerator for, I've read different things. Sometimes they say no more than 2 days. I think that's a little bit short. I've kept them a lot longer than that in the refrigerator. So maybe up to 2 weeks in the refrigerator stored properly. The thing that you will notice if you ever buy a cucumber from the grocery store, sometimes they have this waxy coating on the outside, and that's for shelf life. That's to keep the moisture in, and that's the reason that they put that waxy coating on your store-bought cucumbers. And that's the end of that. These are the resources here that I have used. I don't expect you to write these down or anything. I will be sending, I have all of this on a document that I am ready to send to you after this worksheet is over. There's a lot of information here about varieties. and also a lot of more information about how to grow them in containers and that kind of thing. So you will be getting that. Again, we welcome everybody. We do not discriminate in any way. And now I am ready to close my PowerPoint here and take your questions.
All right. Great job, Debbie. Thank you for that. Very informational. So we did have a few questions in the chat box as you were presenting. I want to make everyone aware we did put the evaluation link in the chat box. If you could fill that out, that's super helpful for us for future workshops we may have. So the first question was, how deep are the roots and will a shallow pot work? And do the roots get wide?
Yes, well, it depends on the variety. So if you're planning on growing in a pot, if you get one of those dwarf varieties or one of those compact plants, your roots won't get as big. But normal ones that are in the ground, they will put down a 3 to 4 foot taproot, and the roots will spread as far as they can, basically within several feet out. Of course, if you have other things planted there or a wall or something, they're blocked. So if they're in a container, they won't get any bigger than your container. So that's why we recommend that you get plants that are specifically bred to be grown in containers. So look in your seed catalog, look in on the seed packet. If you see 4 containers, that's probably a good choice because your roots will be able to be accommodated by a container.
Thank you. The next question is, how do you manage cucumber beetles without pesticide? I know that you mentioned a few organic methods that you use. This specific person tried sacrificial amaranth, but when they go to seed, they're pulled out, and then her cucumbers are quickly killed by the beetle. And they also tried diatomaceous earth, but it did not work well.
Yeah, diatomaceous earth is good for creepy crawly things like slugs and that kind of thing because it sticks to them. The problem with insecticides, like I said, is it does kill bees. If you want to use an insecticide and you want to avoid killing bees, the best option is to do it when bees are at the time of the day when bees are not active in your garden. So probably in the evenings you could try that, and then just I would avoid putting it anywhere near any of the flowers. It will kill everything. The best way to prevent these guys is physical barriers or hand picking them off. So you have to scout, you look for any of those, and if you see them, you remove them by hand. And I mean, I tend to take bugs and squish them in my bare hand. So I know a lot of people are grossed out by that. But that's what I do because they make me angry and I squish them. Physical blocks like row covers, like I said, those are great for keeping the cucumber beetles off of your plants. The row cover is basically a white, kind of a thin sheet of a non-woven type fabric that you can put over the tops of your plants. If you don't want it laying on your plants, you can use stakes or something to support it and keep it off your plants. But this will keep all of those insects off of the plants. The only problem is it'll also keep the bees off. So if your plants are flowering and you've covered them with a row cover, they won't get pollinated unless you want to, unless you're have such a problem that you want to just go in there and hand pollinate all of those cucumbers. So really the best thing to do is to keep them off in any way you can.
Thank you. The next question is, if you're growing them in containers, is a large black nursery pot okay, or is being black going to make the soil too hot?
I don't think the color is going to matter. No, I mean the soil can be nice and warm. They like it hot. They love hot weather. They are basically a tropical fruit originally. Like I said, they came from India. The hotter the better, unless you get too much heat, and of course that'll affect the pollination. But that's not going to be in the pot. I think a black pot would be fine. I wouldn't go with a pot any smaller than 14-inch. Those 14-inch pots. And I wouldn't put, if you're going to start the seeds in the pot, I would start like 2 seeds. And depending on the size that the plant gets, you might want to thin it all the way to 1, because you don't want no more than 2 plants growing in a pot.
All right. The next question is, you talked a little bit about trap plants. So what's a good trap plant for aphids?
Well, the recommendation that I read about was wheat. But anything that aphids like to eat, I don't know. They like to eat a lot of things. I've had some, they'll eat on weeds and things. I had some kind of weed growing up that had aphids all over it. They also liked my okra last year. So anything you want to sacrifice that you see them on, you can try. Personally, I don't have a big problem with aphids because I just, take my hose and squirt them right off. And, they may come back in a few days, but, if they're pretty manageable as far as insects go. They're not anywhere near as big a problem for cucumbers as the cucumber beetle or the squash bugs, I would say.
Right. The next question is, how do you attract lady beetles?
Oh, I love my lady beetles. Um, I have I actually have a lady beetle house. Um, they don't really like it that much. I tend to get wasp in there instead of lady beetles. But if you go back and watch my presentation I did last summer on garden monsters, there's a whole section of that about attracting lady beetles. They like pollen. They eat aphids, but they also eat pollen. So if you have a lot of flowers in growing in your garden or flowering herbs, like I have a lot of flowering herbs like chives that are blooming right now, and I also have garlic chives. My garlic chives are covered with every imaginable kind of pollinator when they bloom later in the summer. They bloom later. The chives are blooming right now with the pretty purple flowers. I have a lot of things blooming in my garden, marigolds, nasturtiums, any kind of pollen producing thing, they'll come be attracted to that.
All right, this next question is about a soaker hose. So this person has a soaker hose on a timer. How many hours per day should they set it for? They're going away for several days next week and would like to make sure the garden stays well watered. They're watering watermelon, cucumbers, tomatoes, raspberries, all on the same spigot.
Okay, well, I mean, it's great to have a soaker hose. That's awesome. I mean, I have my raised bed garden has a drip built in that's connected to my irrigation system. But on my cucumbers, like I said, I just have a soaker hose. No, all soaker hoses are not created equal. And I don't know if you have any documentation that came with your soaker hose, or you can contact the manufacturer and find out what their rate of disbursement of water is. Right now, I have the soaker hose I have is one of those flat ones that expands when you turn the water on. And I have it set on a half an hour. It comes on half an hour every morning right now. I'm not really sure. I could try to measure. You can measure how much water is coming out using like a tuna can or something to collect that water and see how much water you're getting. So it is the best answer I can give is this depends. It depends on your soaker hose. It even depends on how high you have the water turned on in the spigot. So, if you turn it on, of course, if you turn it on low a little bit, you get less water than if you turn it on full blast. So all that stuff you're going to have to figure out and test. And like I said, look at your documentation that came with your soaker hose, or contact the manufacturer to find out what the rate of that particular hose is.
Next question is, can you use the overripe fruit seeds for a seed crop?
I would not use them. I'm not sure. And you also know that if you're growing hybrid cucumbers, you should not save those seeds. Those seeds have been crossed. Two different types of cucumbers bred for usually disease resistance. But if you try to grow those cross seeds, they'll cross-pollinate with something else. You don't know what you're going to get. So you might get something, a surprise kind of cucumber. I would not recommend saving seeds from hybrid cucumbers. Now, if you're growing heirloom like I am, you can save the seeds. The seeds, when the cucumbers get overripe, the seeds get really hard. I'm not sure if they would germinate or not if they are overripe. maybe Larry knows. I know Larry grows cucumbers too. So maybe he can chime in and say what he thinks about saving overripe seeds. Larry, you there?
Yeah, I can't give you any more information than what you just shared there, Deb. I concur that we buy fresh seeds.
Okay. Yeah, and most people buy hybrid seeds anyway, because that's kind of the recommendation for cucumbers, since there's so many problems with diseases. You can buy seeds, like I said, that say multiple disease resistant, or sometimes they say resistant to powdery mildew, resistant to Mosaic virus. So those will all be hybrids, and those seeds shouldn't be saved.
The next question, how much water does a cucumber plant need?
They need about twice as much as the rest of your garden. So 1 to 2 inches. Usually for most vegetables, we say an inch of water a week. That's kind of a general rule of thumb. Cucumbers, since they are 95% water, they need a lot of water to maintain that and not get dried out. So I would say a little more than other plants.
All right, so some people are saying great presentation, tons of information, very helpful, very informative. The next question is, if aphids fall on the soil, then will they come back onto the plant? Like, I guess once you're spraying them with the hose, will they then come back to the plant?
They might. I haven't. Like I said, last year I had them on my okra. I sprayed it with the hose and I didn't see them again. So it's possible they could find their way back. You just knock them off again. It's not. They're really. I mean, honestly, in my opinion, they're not. They're the least of the insect worries. But they could find their way back, and other new aphids could find their way. There's a lot of different species of aphids too, and they're not all alike.
So back to the soaker hose. This person said that there's no documentation on the hose. It was a freebie and came with the house. So Debbie recommends testing with the tuna can. That's the best kind of method to see what kind of what it's releasing. If you want to set it for a half an hour and then see what what's sitting in your can.
Yeah, it's hard when you inherit something and you don't know you don't know anything about it. We hear that a lot.
Right. The last question in the chat here is, I saved seed from overripe cucumbers. So apparently, I guess it's not a question, but they have done that with success.
Oh, they did good. Okay.
But that's the end of the chat question.
Yeah, I know the seeds become pretty hard and brittle, so I wasn't really sure if they would germinate. I saved tomato seeds for the first time last year, and it was a process, and I did it successfly. Usually I'm more into saving flower seeds than vegetable seeds, but I'm getting into it. So I'm growing heirloom cucumbers this year. So I am going to plan to save those seeds, provided that the cucumbers do well. I don't see any sense in saving them if they're not successful, but so.
All right, thank you so much. That's the end of the questions in the chat box. So thank you, Debbie. That was a great presentation.
All right.
Thanks for coming. And there was another one that just came in. It just said they covered the cucumber with a cloth bag to save the seed.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Awesome.
So thanks everybody for coming. I hope you'll come back next week and join us for our pole lima bean class, which is the very last of our Vegetable 101 series. And make sure that when I send you the follow-up email, you check the website or the YouTube page for the previously recorded series if you missed anything. This one will be there when it gets there. Sometime soon. It may be a couple of weeks, so we'll see. Be patient. If you want to watch it again, it will be presented on the website, recorded.
Thank you, Debbie.
Thanks.
Thank you, Debbie. Loved your presentation.
Oh, thanks, Claire.
Thank you. That was very helpful.
Great.
Good. I'm glad. If you have any questions, make sure you send us an email on our helpline email address also. Be happy to look into it.
Debbie, you ready to go get sweet potatoes?
I'm in Canada right now, Claire. So after I come back, I'm not coming back till Memorial Day weekend. We'll be in touch.
Oh, won't that be too late?
No, I've actually planted them in June before. So
Oh,
I planted my cucumbers before I left because I'm missing that ideal window of when they should be planted. And, basically, I'm not growing a lot of them, so I still have more seeds. So if I go back and something happened to them while I was in Canada, then I'll just plant them over again. It's not going to be too late. You can actually plant cucumbers all summer. They're fine. They'll germinate in the heat, unlike things like lettuce that don't want to germinate once it gets warm. So
yeah. No, I was talking about sweet potatoes.
yeah. I planted sweet potatoes in June before. They need 90 to 120 days between planting and harvest. So you have plenty of time to plant them in June and you don't harvest them until October. There's plenty of time for those.
Can you put them in a grow bag and then bring them in for the winter and grow them all year round?
You could try. The problem I've had with sweet potatoes indoors in the winter is just they need a lot of light. They need to keep warm and they need a lot of light. If you have a place to provide that for them, you can try it. I haven't had much success with them in the house in the winter because I just can't give them enough light. They need, at least 8 hours of sunlight.
So a grow light won't do it?
You got to remember that the grow light is not as strong as sunlight. And if you want to try a grow light, you pretty much have to leave it on 24/7. And even so, I don't know if it would work. The light produced by a grow light is much less intense than sunlight.
Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you.
See you later.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for coming.